Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I'm going to be talking about planetary transits, or Gochara, for the month of March 2025. Let's talk this from a Vedic astrology perspective, or Jyotish in Sanskrit. So, ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. And it seems like the theme, perhaps for this month, is beauty and loss. So, let's take a look. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only. It should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And then you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this discussion. If you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish are my videos. All of my teaching videos on the subject are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. I'm pretty good about organizing my videos into playlists so that different videos on certain topic areas are easy to find. So, like, I have a Graha's Planets playlist, Bhava's Houses playlist, Yoga's Planetary Combinations, and there are others as well. If you like to learn astrology by looking at charts of famous people, places, moments, and time, I would check out my Birth Chart Archive List 2024 video, where I have a list of a lot of the famous charts I've analyzed on the channel and the video you can find them in. Because, like this talk, actually, I'll be going through 3 famous charts, but you wouldn't know by the title of the video that they're famous charts in this video. So, and I'll be updating that soon, because the last time I did that was spring of last year. So, also this month, the big news this month astrologically is that we've got eclipses coming up. So I do have a couple of videos, lunar, solar eclipses, chandra, surya, grahan. So that's from a Vedic astrology perspective. If you want an overall view of eclipses, what they are and what they mean, and how to generally expect or how to generally work with them, that video is available. I also have an auspicious timing or muhurta of eclipses. So those 2 videos are out there. If you're brand new to all of this, if you're a newbie, here's a list of the videos I would watch first if you want to get started. So, like North, South, and East Indian style charts. I do Western style charts and those as well. Introduction to navigating a birth chart, the lugna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, first house, planetary aspects, introduction to the constellations, rashis, constellation rashi categories, natural, benefic, and malefic planets or grahas, and then next chapter, lunar mansion. So that's, I think, the uh, you know, most basic kind of foundational videos that I have to get you started if you are starting. Also, my last 3 newest teaching videos, Leo constellation or Simha Rashi, introduction to planetary periods or the dasha sequence, and then Chandra Mangala Yoga, Moon Mars combination. So depending on where you are in your learning, or if you need to catch up, those are the latest teaching videos that I've published. Okay, so let's take a look at the dates for this coming month when things are moving in the sky. So today is March 1st, and Venus is going retrograde, or vakri, and Mercury is also entering uccha nakshatra. March 2nd, Mercury crosses Rahu. March 4th, Sun enters Purva nakshatra. 10th through 13th of March, there's a Mercury-Venus planetary war, graha yuddha. March 12th, Sun will cross Saturn. March 14th, Sun enters Pisces or Mina, so that's a samkranti, sun changing signs. There's also a lunar eclipse, or chandragrahan, in Leo or Simha. So the eclipse happens first, and then the Sun enters pretty soon after the eclipse, which actually creates more instability, frankly. But we'll talk about what all this means. I'm just giving you the dates first. 15th of March, Mercury goes retrograde. 16th of March, Rahu enters Purva nakshatra. 17th of March, Sun crosses Rahu, and it enters Uttara nakshatra. Mercury goes combust or asta the same day. 17th through 27th of March, these dates might be a little bit fuzzy, but about this time, Venus goes combust. The reason why I say they're a little fuzzy is that I didn't see any indication from my Jyotish software that Venus was going combust, but I knew that it must be going combust because it's like crossing Sun. So, some glitch in the software. So if you use software for this kind of stuff, you always want to keep your own, check on software reality. But for about 10 days, Venus will be going combust. March 22nd, Venus crosses Sun, and then March 24th, Mercury crosses Sun. Then March 29th, we have a solar eclipse or surya grahan in Pisces Mina. That same day, Saturn leaves combustion and enters Pisces, so that's going to be a big, big day. And then March 31st, Sun enters Revati Nakshatra, Mercury leaves combustion, and Venus enters Purva Nakshatra. All right, so let's take a look. So these two charts here are the first of the month and the 31st of the month, so first and last day of the month, just so we can see how the planets are shifting in the sky. Okay. So what I've done with both of these charts is I've oriented them so that we have Aries rising or Mesha Lugna charts. Okay. Different names, one's English, one's Sanskrit, different names for the same thing. So what that does is when you put the first constellation of Aries or Mesha in the first house, you get what's called a natural zodiac. And the natural zodiac is something that essentially represents all of humanity, the world, that sort of thing. So we're talking about collective energy here. Okay. So again, if you're new to Vedic astrology, I use North Indian style charts in my work. The half diamond in the middle, with the little one in the bottom corner, that's the first house. Okay. Also known as the ascendant, also known as the rising sign, also known as the lugna. The one in the bottom corner does not indicate the first house. It indicates the first constellation of Aries or Mesha. So what that means is Aries is in the first house. Then to get to the other houses, you count counterclockwise inclusively. So you start at the lugna, and you count one, and then you go up and back, so that kind of upside down triangle with the 2 in the bottom corner, that's the second house. Again, not because the 2 is there. The 2 represents the second constellation, Taurus. So that means Taurus is in the second house. Okay. So let's take a look at March 1st here. The time is set to 8:12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time. That's just the time zone I live in, but I've set both of these for 1 degree ascendant and Aries, okay? So that we can compare charts here at the beginning and end of the month. So the moon nakshatra in this first chart on the left is in Uttar Bhadrapada. So Uttar Bhadrapada is symbolized by the back legs of a funeral pyre. So there's a lot of transformation going on here. But the thing is with Uttar Bhadrapada, there's this also notion of taking a step back and being a bit objective and like consciously releasing, whatever is transforming or whatever are attached to that sort of thing. Okay. And the moon represents the public and also emotion. So this could be a lot of like public chaos or emotional chaos going on here. Then the dasha period. And the dasha is the planetary period. So what planets are run at this time. The dasha period is Saturn, Ketu, Jupiter, Moon. Okay. Now Saturn is up in its own sign in the 11th house here of Aquarius. And the thing is, Saturn is aspecting the lugna, the first house, where it's debilitated. So Saturn represents delays, obstacles, antiquity, chronic disease, death. It can be even, but especially when Saturn is debilitated in the first house, that means that there's like a general restructuring going on of first house matters, which is the self, the physical self, also psychology. And on top of that, Saturn is in a nakshatra called Purva Bhadrapada, which is the front legs of the funeral pyre. So that's related to Uttar Bhadrapada, but it's actually, essentially just the transformation, the chaos and the fumes and all this kind of stuff. So there's a big, Saturn is really like just crushing, is in this place of just crushing things, okay? Saturn also represents like employees, for example. And so, for example, in the United States, we have a lot of government employees who are being let go by the current administration. Okay. So, also Saturn represents things like fear and skepticism, doubt, anxiety, depression, that sort of thing. So, and Saturn is in its own house in the 11th, its own sign in the 11th house, which is club, group, society, but also income. Saturn also happens to be combust right now because Saturn is so close to the sun that you can't see it. It's eclipsed by the light rays of the sun. So what that means is there may not be so much external manifestation of Saturnian energies, but internally there's going to be a lot. And so, like I mentioned, like the government, having a lot of turnover right now. The United States government is doing that, And, my day job is I'm a physician, a naturopathic physician. And already almost every person who's coming in the office, they're talking about how all these huge, layoffs and turnovers related to the government are affecting their job, even though they're not in the middle of it. It's just sort of collateral damage coming their way because of the organization, even if they're not directly working with the government. Their organization is funded by the government, and they've shut off funding for a lot of things. Or like another person I can think of, like her son works for the government in a pretty high level position, so she's involved with his, situation. So there's a lot going on. Just as an example, though. So Saturn is there, and then K2. K2 is in the sixth house of enemies and also daily habits. K2 is a fiery planet. It's the south node of the moon. It brings energy of unusual, hidden, unexpected things. Uh, K2 is in a nakshatra called Uttara Falguni at this point, which is symbolized by a hammock. So this could actually be, which it usually is associated with like, good times, like socializing and finer things of life and all this kind of stuff. But with K2 there, this might actually be like, like a loss of those things, like a loss of good times, lots of easy going, fun times, that sort of thing. In the sixth house too, sixth house represents enemies and also daily activity, so there can be disruptions along those lines. Jupiter is the next, planet there in the dasha lineup. Jupiter is in the second house. Jupiter represents things like advice, diplomacy. It's in the second house of, it's in the sign of Taurus. It's in the second house representing speech. So there can be a lot of speech here. It's also in parivartana exchange of house with Venus. So that means you can bring Venus into the second house, into its own sign. So this should potentially be a lot of sweet, speech. Also assets, money, because the second house represents that. But we have this K2 aspecting into the second house. So there can be disruptions here, upsets here, that sort of thing. Or it could also be like sugarcoating, like people talking sweet talk, but underneath the surface, there's a lot of, weird and wild stuff going on, essentially, okay? And then we have the moon. So the moon represents, again, the public, also the emotional mind, the intuitive mind. And you can see moon is in the 12th house of losses and expenditures here. So, and moon is with Rahu, the, north node of the moon. Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the moon, can indicate like mental health problems, mental illness. And especially when you get moon in that mix on that Rahu Ketu axis, even more so, because moon is, mind and emotions. But you also have Mercury there. So you have the two mental planets on the Rahu Ketu axis at the beginning of the month. Okay, and all of this is going on in the 12th house of losses and expenditures. Also, the 12th house represents like foreign relationships. So we've got a lot of, foreign relationship stuff going on in the news currently. And so you can see how some of this is playing out even from just the kind of United States, current affairs type stuff. Okay, but the things that are going on are reverberating around the world, essentially. Okay. So Saturn, K2, Jupiter, Moon, troubles, losses of structure, creating mental, emotional stress, essentially. Yeah. So we have a bunch of yogas, planetary combinations in this chart. We have a Vesha yoga, that's a solar yoga. The sun is supported to some degree by the true planet's second house from the sun. We have an Anafa yoga, lunar yoga. So the moon is supported to some degree, although it's probably diminished more by this combust Saturn in its own sign in Purva Drapada. Then we have a Shubhakartra yoga. That's actually helpful, I would say, with all of this going on. Shubhakartra yoga is when you have natural benefic planets on either side of the lugna. So because we have Jupiter in the second house, Venus in the 12th house, and they're also in parivartana, that's going to create some ability to through the noise and the mess that's currently going on. Okay. We have a Chandramangala yoga. So, again, I just published a video on that. Chandramangala yoga is when the Mars is 1, 4, 7, 10 houses away from the moon. That indicates some amount of wealth that's given. We have a Pravraja yoga. That's that four planets in the 12th house. That creates a life focus yoga. So the focus here is on losses, expenditures, and also, foreign affairs. And that's going to be building because you can see in the second chart, like then we get Saturn in the middle of all that as well. Um, the other thing about this chart, Mars is karako bhava nasha. So Mars is a planet that represents like siblings and enemies, and it's in the third house that represents siblings. So when we have Mars in the third house, that can indicate problems with siblings, but the third house also represents neighbors. So, that can be part of what's going on. Like there was a, verbal tussle that was caught on camera between the current president of the United States and the leader of Ukraine. And in a somewhat sort of bizarre interaction, they were almost essentially yelling at each other and cutting each other off. It was, which is essentially a lot of this kind of energy. Okay. That's the thing is like, this is actually, but the thing is like, it was part of what was wild about it was that they're actually an ally of ours. And they were trying to, sign off on some, wealth giving deal. Um, it all kind of blew up. So that's that K2 in the second house, and then Mars in the third house. Like, this is like having issues again with, and third house not only represents siblings, but friends and neighbors. So it's like arguing with people that, probably, unlikely to be arguing, you should be arguing with, they're not like potentially true enemies here. Yeah, so, that's all that. So Mars is not only Karka Bhavanasha, so Mars in the third house, but it's also Bhavat Bhavam. So Bhavat Bhavam, it's Bhavat Bhavam because Mars owns the eighth house of chronic deep problems, and that's bringing that eighth house energy into the third house. So whatever is going on here in the third house is actually creating long-term problems, which is, again, not surprising given, the level that some of this stuff is, occurring on. Um, there's also a Sadhisati in this chart. So Sadhisati is when uh, Saturn is in the constellation before, of, or after the moon. That indicates a loss of a major support system, long-term support system. So that also seems to be playing out. So again, when you get all this together here at the beginning of the month, we got sugarcoating losses of work, community coworkers, and part of that is that why I'm saying community coworkers is Saturn, Swa, Combust, and Purvabhadapa in the 11th house. The 11th house represents clubs, groups, societies. It also represents coworkers. It also represents friends. It also represents income. Okay. And the Saturn that's combust in its own sign is Lord of the 10th house of daily activity. Okay. So, and a lot of mental emotional stress, a very confusing time, especially this Rahu, Moon, Mercury situation, and a lot of mood issues. Yeah, a lot of people stressed out. Okay, then if we move to the second chart here, again, end of the month, March 31st, the time is 7:14 a.m. Eastern Standard New York time. The moon nakshatra in the second chart is in Bharani. Bharani is symbolized by a womb, so there's a new kind of birthing cycle that's happening here. Especially because moon not only represents public and emotions and mind, but also represents mothers. So when I see moon and Bharani, I think of like, mothering. There can be this kind of association of like almost like a foster mother or adoptive mother with a Bharani as well. So there might be some amount of that nurturing energy, new birth cycle kind of coming on. The only thing is that, do you still have that? No, not necessarily, because Saturn has moved, out of Aquarius by the end of the month, just a couple days before. But the thing is, you can see that the ruler of Aries, which is Mars, is sandhi, meaning it's in the last degree of a sign, first or last degree of a sign. That means Mars is going to be unstable. So the Lugna was unstable in the first chart because we had this debilitated Saturn energy coming from Saturn. And then the second chart, is also unstable because the ruling planet for the chart is switching signs. So we still got some instability here up at the Lugna. The dasha period for the second chart is Venus, Venus, Mercury, Venus. Well, both of those planets are in the 12th house, aspecting the 6th house. So that's going to light up 6-12 house issues. So 6th, again, is enemies, especially overt enemies, daily activities, loans, acute problems, acute medical issues. And then the 12th house, again, losses, expenditures, hidden enemies, um, isolation and overseas, issues, problems abroad, that sort of thing. Imports, exports. So that's another thing, at least in the United States, is going on, is that we're starting to impose tariffs on different countries. Like, I think we just imposed a 10% tariff on China. And I believe Canada and Mexico have a little bit more time, but tariffs are going that way as well. And again, these are our neighbors that we've been, at least trade partners with for a long time. So again, there's some, kind of erratic, kind of aggressive activity along those lines. Venus and Mercury, though, the other thing that was the focus, like in the beginning, the focus is a little bit more philosophical, mental, emotional, but like distant, because Saturn and Ketu are kind of separatist planets. I'm talking about the Dasha period now in the first chart versus the second. Jupiter's philosophy and Moon is the mind, so it's like, changes or, disruptions and philosophy of the mind and emotions, that sort of thing, public welfare. But then we move to Venus, Venus, Mercury, Venus. Well, Venus, since it's so strong here in the Dasha period, Venus represents loved ones, spouse-like partner. It represents wealth. It represents diplomacy. It represents social grace. Um, and a lot of that's on the line for a lot of people. The other thing is Mercury's in there. Mercury represents friendships. It represents logic. It represents, analysis, planning. So that's the thing, is a lot of people are really confused right now because so many changes are happening on so many different levels that they can't even plan anything, you know, for themselves. Like day to day, they don't know what's coming at them at work or if work is coming at them at all, So a lot of confusion, a lot of drain here on relationships, um, and sort of like, again, the minor things of life, especially with Venus, I mentioned, is going kamba. So luckily, Venus is exalted, so that'll bring some support, and it's an exchange with Jupiter, that'll bring some support. But Venus is also, in nakshatra, is in the Uttar Bhadrapada nakshatra. So it's still on the funeral pyre. There's still a lot of transformation going on here. But this is because at least Venus is in Uttar Bhadrapada. So at least there's some, again, stepping back, conscious release. It's almost like what this time reminds me of is like, I analyzed, and I think I have this on another chart, the exact video it's in. But at some point, you know, on my channel, I analyzed the sinking of the Titanic. Okay. And as I was going through the charts and the energy for this month, it's like that's the image that kind of kept coming up. Is it's like, because the Titanic was this huge luxury liner, bigger than anything. You've got all these people dancing and eating fine food with on this beautiful ship and da da da, all this kind of stuff. Then, when it hit the iceberg, a couple times, I believe, it started, the whole came there, the water rushed in, it started to sink. And then there's this, like, they had a few moments, right, before it went down completely. They had a few moments where they had to decide what they were going to grab before the ship went down. Okay. And so that's kind of like the vibe for this moment. And that's also why it seemed like the theme for this month, is beauty and loss. Because it's kind of like with all this, we have 5 planets here, 4, it's leading up. Like we have 3, 4, 5, there are going to be at some point 6 planets, or there was 6 planets here when Moon, like a couple days before this March 31st, there are actually 6 planets here in the 12th house of loss and expenditures. Even though there's some grace here, even though there's some beauty here, and that's the beauty part, like there's also losses. And so it's sort of like, it's like that mental exercise you can potentially do before anything actually happens. It's like, if your house burned down, what are the, three things or one or three things you would grab before you left the house? And I've been through that. I literally, on my property, I've had a couple fires on the corners. Luckily, the house didn't burn down, but it was close enough I could see the fire outside my window and hoping that the firemen would like take care of it, which they did, thank God. But I was thinking to myself, like, if I have to like evacuate now, what would I take with me? And I don't have a big place. I don't have too much stuff, but I was just like, I think the only thing that really matters to me is my dog. As long as my dog is okay, everything else essentially can be replaced. It would be really inconvenient. So I probably would, get my dog, my computer, and a couple of practical things, because essentially I know I'd have to rebuild. That's kind of it. I was kind of like, there isn't a whole lot I would actually grab from my house. So it was very clear to me, like, what my priorities were, and that's kind of what's going on here in all of this, this Pravraja yoga, this conglomeration of planets in the 12 houses. It's like a lot of stuff's being lost because you can trace, like, from each planet, like in the second chart, Mercury owns the third house. So they're going to be, you can bring third house energy to the 12th house. Mercury also owns the sixth house. So you can bring sixth house energy to the 12th house. Sun owns the fifth house. So you're going to fifth house energy, So between these four planets, because Rahu doesn't own any houses, but Mercury owns two, Venus owns two, Saturn owns two, Sun owns one. And Moon was just there a couple days ago on the 29th when the eclipse was happening. So Moon also owns one. 8 out of 12 houses are drawing energy into this 12th house of losses and expenditures. Okay, so it's kind of like things are going down. What's the most precious, important stuff? Like, grab that if you can, but then just let the rest just kind of flush away, essentially. So there is beauty there. It's almost like when I was thinking of the Titanic movie, like there's that older woman, Rose, who was the character. Kate Winslet was the main character, and she was with Leonardo DiCaprio, and they were doing this whole thing. And then there was this like big diamond necklace that was like a blue heart or whatever. And what's interesting is that I think she had the clothes on her back and basically that diamond necklace. Um, and then the partner, Leo's character, ended up, passing away or drowning or whatever. But she kept that for however many years until they found her and wanted to interview her about the story of the Titanic. But at the end, even that, she like tossed in the ocean. Because she's like, the memories and experience I had with Leo's character, were the real treasure. And, when it's my time to go, I'll have those even then. But this diamond necklace is sort of like, whatever. Even though clearly, like, if you sold it on auction, I'm sure it would make a lot of money. But, for her, that moment was very clear about what was truly important in life and precious to her. And that can be different for everybody, right? So anyway, yeah, so let's just keep going here. So when this ties into this whole dasha thing with the Venus Mercury, where it's like, in the beginning, it's like about ideas and, philosophy, but then when we get to Venus, I mean, Jupiter is the kind of philosophical, spiritual counselor, but Venus is the mundane counselor. Venus is like let's get real. It's like, okay, how do we make this work in the real world? And it's all about friends and loved ones here at the end. Okay. And there's some beauty here because Venus also represents art and beauty, love, romance, that sort of thing, right? So there are some yogas here in the second chart as well. Sunafa again, parivartana again, kartriya, that's the same. Mars is still karako, bhava, nashaya, bhavam, but it's now sandhi. The other thing is Saturn is also sandhi. So we've got two sandhi planets. And you can see Rahu and Ketu are edging towards sandhi. So we have almost 4 planets that are unstable because they're so close to crossing signs. That'll bring instability to the whole chart. And we also have a sati, again, loss of a major support system in the second chart as well. Okay, so all this together, sudden loss, relationships, friends, coworkers, unstable authority, government, daily activity and speech, because Now Saturn was aspecting and debilitated in the first house, but now Saturn is in all these planets in the 12th house of losses and expenditures. And now Saturn is also aspecting the second house. So before you could kind of cover up, the Jupiter and Venus there in the second house could sugarcoat, you know, some, not so likable things going on here. But with Saturn now aspecting the second house, this is going to be very terse speech, especially because Saturn is unstable and it's in Purva Bhadrapada in Pisces. Saturn is not going to be as strong as Saturn has been in Aquarius. Saturn is going to be less stable in Pisces. At least it's not an enemy sign, but it's a neutral sign. But there's going to be a lot of emotional fallout from all of this because Pisces is a water sign, it's an emotional sign. So now we're going to get real, kind of more real and more rugged because of all these losses here. Also, what is it? Jupiter owns the ninth house of government authority. Saturn is aspecting Jupiter, and it's aspecting the ninth house that is owned by Jupiter. So this Saturn that's unstable in Purva Bhadrapada in Pisces, because Saturn is now, the thing is, unfortunately, Saturn is now on Jupiter and on the two houses that Jupiter owns. So it's Pisces and Sagittarius. The other thing is Saturn is on Venus, and Saturn is on Taurus, which is one of the houses Venus owns. So Saturn, this pretty gnarly Saturn, is going to bring losses and endings to the two great benefics and the two houses the two houses Jupiter owns and one of the houses that Venus owns. So the Saturn is going to be repressing Venus and Jupiter, which again are the two great benefic and generous planets here. And, that's going to be going on for a bit of time. Jupiter's moving out of Taurus mid-May, and Venus is moving out of Pisces end of May. So from the time, and again, Saturn just moved into this Pisces on the 29th. So it was at March. So it's a good 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks, where Saturn is essentially suppressing the two great benefics. Okay, so, and thing is, again, all these planets that are on the 6-12 axis, again, the 6th house is overt enemies, 12th house is hidden enemies. So a lot of overt and hidden obstructions and enemies. And I would even say here, financial shock. The reason why is that Saturn, again, even though it was in Purva Bhadrapada, even though it was in its own sign, pretty hardcore, Saturn in the 11th house, the fact that Saturn was in its own sign was protecting in inanimate objects in the 11th house. Okay. The thing, though, is that once Saturn moves to the 12th house, that means you're going to get a loss of 11th house issues. Okay, and 11th house is again clubs, group, society, so it's going to fray, social circles. The other thing is the 11th house is income, so losses through income here. Okay, so that's one thing. Also, Saturn is now aspecting, so Saturn's is related to the 11th house, which is one money house. The other thing is Saturn is repressing or suppressing the second house of assets. The other thing is Saturn is suppressing the energy of Jupiter and Venus, which are the true big kind of on their own finance and wealth planets. And because Saturn again is a sandhi and unstable and crossing signs, I could see this being some kind of financial shock, and Jupiter also represents potentially the stock market as well. So with all the jazz, all the kind of crazy back and forth, whatever political, economic stuff that's going on, I think it's coming from the politics, and then that's the thing is even business owners are just things are so unstable. I don't know which way to go. I don't know what to invest in or who to invest in right now because I don't know which way things are going to go. So that might actually end up being like a stock market crash potentially, or the beginning of like a recession, depression potentially, unfortunately. But it does look like there are going to be pretty deep financial repercussions from all the, infighting, outfighting, neighbor fighting stuff that's going on. Okay, but again, I don't mean to be like so doom and gloom here, and I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but I think it's like, again, it's one of those moments where, what's truly precious? Do you know what I mean? Like the kind of stuff that, like, no matter what's going on, you still want to hang on to it. Like if it's a person or an activity or maybe it's some, item, sentimental item or whatever. Like, what is it that you will hang on to, regardless of what the chaos or storm that's sort of swirling around you? I think that's potentially the beauty of this moment, is getting very clear about what's important and precious to you. Okay, so let's see. Let's get into some details now. That was just sort of the overall. Okay, so on this slide, let's take a look at Mercury and Venus here. So Buddha and Shukra. So March 1st, again, Venus goes retrograde or vakri, and Mercury enters uccha or bhadrapada nakshatra. So, just the context here, Venus is in Pisces or Meena where it's exalted. So that's going to, bring some strength to Venus. That's going to be helpful. And it's in parivartana with the Swa Jupiter. So that's going to, also bring strength to Taurus, where Jupiter's sitting. And it's going to bring Jupiter back to its own house. So that's going to bring some support, some protection for everything that's going on in Pisces or Meena. Pisces is a neutral sign for Mercury. Okay. Let's see. But the thing is, like, again, of these different planets in Pisces right now, Venus, Moon, Rahu, Mercury, Saturn, Saturn's not in Pisces, but Venus, Moon, Rahu, and Mercury are. Saturn, is in Aquarius still for the time being. But 5 out of 9 planets are in either Uttara or Purva Bhadrapada. Again, both of those symbolized by a funeral pyre. The Purva Bhadrapada is the more virulent, like just flames and, burn, baby, burn type energy, frankly. Uttara Bhadrapada can have like a spiritual kind of connotation to it, where again, it's like letting the material world go, consciously releasing material things, surrendering to transformation of different kinds, that kind of thing. So there's chaos and transformation, but again, at least as the planets are starting to move, more of the planets are moving in Uttara Bhadrapada, there can be more of like an objective energy to it rather than getting sucked into the chaos, type energy. The other thing is that when you have the 2 mind planets, Moon and Mercury and Rahu or Ketu, they can create, like, again, mental health, mental stress, emotional stress, mental health issues can indicate that. The other thing is it can indicate that there's a lot of psychic energy. And that tends to happen with eclipses anyway, because the moon is always involved with an eclipse, but now we've got Mercury too. So you might find, especially over the course of the month, that you're getting more psychic hits or dreaming more and that sort of thing. But again, this is all happening in a dual water sign. So there are going to be a lot of mixed emotions about what are going on. And then reviewing, because Venus is going retrograde, reviewing relationships, travel, finance, business, and all this sort of thing. Okay. Then the 2nd of Mars, Mercury crosses Rahu. So Rahu, again, is always going to create some sort of unusual, unexpected things. So Mercury represents things like communication, travel, decisions. So this might be like all of a sudden, like a sudden change of communication or travel decisions, plans, going on here. Then 10th through 13th of March, Venus and Mercury in planetary war. So again, luckily Venus is exalted. Mercury's debilitated, but because Venus is exalted, it creates a nicha bhanga to ameliorate some of the debilitation of Mercury, and we have that Swa Jupiter through parivartana. So Mercury and Venus are going to be in Uttara Bhadrapada. So it's like, again, sorting through what's really of value here. What do we really care about here? What's really in our hearts here? What's really meaningful and precious to us? Okay. Then 15th of March, Mercury goes retrograde. So Mercury's also going to start reviewing the thoughts and decisions that have been made here. 7th through to 27th of March, again, I believe question mark. These are the dates when Venus will go combust. Now that's a whole thing. I have a whole video on Venus and Jupiter combust and how that's not an auspicious time to start a lot of projects. So you might want to watch that video if you're thinking of starting something right now, or during this time. But when Venus goes combust, again, when you have a combust planet, you don't see the outward manifestations of that planet. So again, Venus represents diplomacy, generosity, social grace, loved ones, art, travel, the finer things of life. So it's going to get pretty rough here, for about 10 days, in the second half of the month. And just as like an example, last year, I believe it's last year, yeah, Venus and Jupiter, both the two great natural benefics, were combust for 1 month, okay, together. And that was when, in the United States, at least, we had a lot of students protesting and vandalizing, property on university campuses across the country, in protest of things that were going on in the Middle East. Okay. So again, it was just like, forget the rules. We're going to do whatever. We're not going to stay inside the lines. So it might be pretty, again, rough here because Venus is going combust for a while. So there might be losses to the above. It's also, again, an inauspicious time for a lot of things. So you might check out that video if there's any kind of new thing you want to get involved in during this month. But again, usually the eclipse times is not the best time to make big decisions. Although sometimes because of the, destiny patterns related to different, eclipse events, sometimes, people or circumstances will pop up in your life that you never intended or expected because that's part of your, again, destiny pattern or path in life. So sometimes things are decided. It seems like things are being decided for you. Things will be presented in your path. Like, oh, where did this come from? I wasn't even thinking about this or didn't want it, but there it is. 17th through 31st of March, Mercury goes combust. So this is going to be more of an internal sorting, consideration, introspective time, rather than, again, putting out ideas and plans outwardly, maybe to others. 22nd of March, Venus crosses Sun. So again, the Sun represents the soul, it represents career, it represents health, vitality. So again, what I was getting from that, especially with this all happening with some amount of padding, because again, Jupiter is in its own sign in Pisces, but this is a dual water sign. There's going to be a lot of mixed emotions about all this reviewing of stuff. But what or who is truly in your heart and soul? It's like, I think there's a song, right? That was written during the pandemic. It's like, if everything fell apart, like, again, what or who would you keep? What would you keep, what or who would you keep kind of attached to or investing in, moving forward, regardless of the circumstances, Then Mercury crosses Sun a couple days later. Again, this is making a choice. So the Venus crossing Sun is like, what do you really feel? Because Venus is an emotional planet, and Mercury's like, so what do you actually choose? Yeah. March 31st, Venus enters Purva Nakshatra because it's going backwards. So this might be, after this internal reviewing process is going on, Venus goes into Purva. Again, there's not as much objectivity or distance here. This is where it's like, there will be some losses here. And again, all of this brings to mind the image of a boat sinking, and specifically the Titanic. And I did analyze the Titanic, which was really interesting when I did that, because Titanic left port in England a few days before an eclipse, and the place where it sank was actually during the eclipse path. Was exactly the eclipse path, which is a solar eclipse, because the solar eclipse path is always much shorter. Or like, it's a very defined, it's like a little squiggly line. It's much more defined and limited than a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse can cover like most of the world at any time. So that video, if you do want to look at the Titanic sinking analysis, that is in my July 2023 planet transit video. So for those who are interested in that. And also, I was just checking, there is a Pravraja yoga in Pisces for the Titanic sinking, so that might also be why that's coming to mind. Yeah, so that's out there. All right, so during these monthly videos, I like to look at different famous birth charts to get some idea of more than just being abstract about all these energies. Like, how do these sorts of energies potentially manifest in the real world? On the worldly plane. So this is one of the charts I found, and again, these charts all have some recreation of current sky patterns. So there might be some information or energy that's similar. But this is the chart of Vincent van Gogh, a famous painter, a Dutch painter. So his birth chart here, he was born 30th of March, 1853, 11 a.m. in Zundert, Netherlands. The Lugna nakshatra here is a Sandhi Punarvasu. So again, he's at the last degree here of Gemini. Punarvasu is symbolized by a quiver of arrows. So it's like this box that you have on your back and you load your arrows there or keep your arrows there, and then you pull out the arrows and string them on your bow and shoot them out, and the arrows fly out, and then you go sometimes pick them up and bring them back. So there's this energy of like cycling here, revolving, like it can be like a revolving energy. Okay. Especially because it's Sunday, that means there's unstable revolving here. Okay, so that's the first thing about the chart. Then the Sun Nakshatra is in Revati. Revati in Pisces here. So you can see in his chart, he's got 3 planets, Sun, Venus, and Mars in Pisces. So he has a Praraja in Pisces, somewhat similar to the current sky pattern. Okay. So Revati is about foreign travel and about hospitality and that sort of thing. So the Sun being there, I would see this potentially as somebody who has like a global career, which he ended up having. Okay. Now the Moon Nakshatra, the moon again represents the mind and emotions. The moon nakshatra is at Gandanta, not just Sandhi, but Gandanta. So I have a whole video on Sandhi and Gandanta. Gandanta is more unstable than Sandhi. Sandhi is when a planet is in the first or last degree of a sign because it's crossing signs, and the signs are related to different elements like fire, water, earth, whatever. Gandanta is when not only are you crossing signs, but you're also crossing nakshatra. So it's a dual instability, and the mind is there. Okay. And it's in Jesta. Jesta is this very like protective type energy. Like you can sometimes, depending on the placement, get people who are like involved in like military or law enforcement or that sort of thing. So there's some sort of protecting of the mind that's quite very, very unstable here. The other thing is moon is debilitated. So we have a debilitated moon, Gandanta, in Jesta. A lot of mental instability. And that's what he's known for also. Besides his art, he's known for his mental emotional instability. Okay. So the day lord in this chart is Mercury. The hora lord or hour lord is Sun. And so again, Sun is a leader, like president, master, and Mercury is a thought. Okay. So he was a thought leader in the world of art. Okay. And the birth dasha, again, planetary period, was Mercury, Saturn, Venus, Mercury. So again, Mercury. So one, that's the self, the psychology and the physicality, because Mercury rules Gemini, the rising sign here. Venus is art, and Saturn is like again structure. So again, pioneer and structure of art. Like literally, even the way he laid paint on a canvas, like very thick and very like textural, you know, um, rather than like these thin strokes, that were just all blended in. That was all pioneering stuff. So again, his chart recreates the current sky pattern. Sun and Venus are in Pisces. He's got a Pravaraja Yoga in Pisces. Saturn's debilitated in Aries. Also, K2 has 5-9 aspects. Because of the placement with K2 and its dispositor Jupiter, you can take this K2 energy 5 and 9 houses away, and that currently is happening in the current sky pattern because of the relative position of Mercury in K2. So K2 again is going to bring erratic energy, especially because also like Moon is Gandanta, but K2 is also Gandanta here. So Moon and K2 so close together, there's going to be a lot of unstable mental health issues. And Jupiter is also pretty close to Gandanta here. So again, Moon is in Jesta, which is very hardcore energy, like a very tough, protective type energy. Jupiter and Ketu are in Mula nakshatra. Mula is like the deity associated with Mula is Kali, the goddess of destruction. So it is, Jupiter, it helps to have Jupiter here, but with this Moon, Ketu, Jupiter, all basically gandanta here, this is like a pretty serious like mental health issue picture for somebody. And again, we already mentioned like the lugna, the lugna nakshatra, or the lugna itself, the whole chart is basically in the last degree. So just from this alone, this is somebody who's going to have a lot of problems. Okay. Because you have even Rahu again. Rahu is sandhi, the lugna is sandhi, Jupiter, Ketu, Moon, or gandanta. I mean, that's like 5 elements out of 10. And Saturn is up here debilitated. I mean, but you do have this exalted Venus. That's going to bring power. And you do have a Swa Jupiter. So the two great benefics are very strong. But unfortunately, almost everything else is pretty weak. So that's why you have this exaggeration of, this like, pretty strong, deep mental health picture with, this like genius artist. This is exaggerated natural benefics and exaggerated malefics going on here. And that was that he had a very exaggerated life. So let's go through house by house and see what we see. So the Lugna is a Gemini, Mithuna, rising sign, a dual air sign. So a lot of, again, mixed thoughts here. That doesn't help with stability. Sandhi, Rahu, and Mrigashirsha. So somebody who's like always kind of looking, seeking, like never really settled, And then we have aspected by Gandanta, Swa, Jupiter, and Mula. It's also aspected by Mars and Uttrapadrapada. So Mars and Uttrapadrapada, this is going to be a very like literally fiery but unstable dual Mars, because Mars, look at that, you have 1, 2, 3, 6 planets in dual signs. Rahu, Jupiter, Ketu, Mars, Venus, Sun. Again, really the only stability here is this Venus that's exalted and this Jupiter that's Swa. Saturn potentially could give some structure, but it's debilitated. So yeah, you can see how this is building up here. And also debilitated Saturn in Kritika nakshatra. So Kritika is a dual nakshatra, symbolized by Kartikeya, the celestial chief, commander-in-chief of the army, the commander-in-chief of the celestial army. But Kritika is a dual nakshatra, so there's that fighting energy and victorious energy, but there's also this foster mother energy here, because the story of Kartikeya involves him being raised by several foster mothers. So, yeah, a lot of instability here. This Rahu would bring ambition. It's also going to be this unusual, quirky, nature, a seeker, philosophical, also potentially spiritual. He was a missionary at some point. I didn't know that until I read his bio. But a lot of dual thoughts and action, very conflicting within himself. Fighting and nurturing, destructive of self and others, unstable, both a pioneer and engineer, so that's all true. The Lugnatia ruling planet for the chart is Mercury. It's an Ashwini. Ashwini brings a energy of, being a pioneer. So despite all this instability here, he was a pioneer in many on many levels. The Lugnatia has gone to the 11th house of the Kama. Kama is enjoyment, so that was his main motivation in life. Because again, he painted something like over 2,000 paintings, and he only sold one. I mean, he clearly wasn't, doing it for the money. There was something else going on there. Saturn. See, Saturn is there, debilitated. That's really going to draw down Mercury. And again, Mercury is the other mind planet. So, there's not stability with either of the mind planets here, Mercury or Moon. Jupiter aspects here, K2 aspects here. So again, this like Jupiter, K2, unusual energy in Mulan is going to be on uh, Mercury, and essentially Moon. I would say the Moon as well, because within like an hour or two, Moon is going to be right here with this Jupiter Ketu business. Although it's worse that Moon is off just by a degree or so, because Moon is debilitated here. If Moon was even in the same house as Jupiter Ketu, that would probably be a bit better. Because at least the dispositor of Moon would be Swa. Yeah, that would bring more stability to the mind. But yeah, it's like all toast essentially. Um, so the 11th house, right? We talked about this: clubs, groups, society, also income. All very unusual, unstable social circles, relationships, incomes. He used to get money from his brother. His brother would support him. Uh, Also, this 11th house, I believe, is a destructive physical feature. The third house and the 11th house can represent the ear, literally. Mercury can represent ears and hearing. And so this like debilitated Saturn represents structure, debilitated structure, and the 11th house represents the left ear, even though it's the right side of the chart. So this physical destruction, um, but also this mental health issue stuff is all here in this 11th house. This could be him like blowing up relationships, which is what he did. Like when he cut off his ear, or I don't know if he cut off the whole thing, but he injured his ear pretty significantly. So that was when he was talking to Gauguin, another painter or another artist. They had some falling out. And so they had their falling out, and then he, mangled his ear, which he didn't even remember. So it was like almost like this psychotic break or something that happened, and you can see all this going on in the 11th house here. But this 11th house could be this, like, specifically the left ear being cut by himself following an argument with a fellow artist. There are a bunch of yogas in here, predominantly the Pravraja, the life focus here of Sun, Venus, Mars, and in the 10th house. So this is reputation, fame, daily activity. The Sun's here going to energize this. Venus is exalted here. So he started off life in Mercury, then he ran K2, which is short period. It's like 7 years. Then most of his young adult life, he was in Venus. While he was in Venus period, he was involved in the art world, but mostly as an art dealer. And you can see, we'll talk about, but the 5th house here, the Lord is this exalted Venus. It's aspected by Saturn, where Saturn is exalted in Libra here, and then Mercury and Mars. So this is this art dealership situation here that he was doing while he was in this Venus period. He actually didn't start really, really painting until he got into a Sun period, which he was, I think, almost 30, because he died pretty young, like 37. So he didn't actually all the prolific paintings and stuff he did. That was all within the last 10 years of his life. I mean, that was pretty amazing. I didn't know that either. Um, I thought he'd been painting his whole life, but no, he was really an art dealer for a long time. So he was a advisor about technical things related to art, which is this 5th house for him, which is a pretty strong 5th house. And that's why it was when he was running Venus, that was stronger. Because even though Venus is exalted here, because I would have probably thought like um, Venus is not as strong as it looks. The reason why is that you can see it's within a couple degrees of Mars here. So a few days before he was born, Venus and Mars were in planetary war. That's going to bring more contentious energy to the whole chart, but also with art and relationships, siblings. And even though his brother was quite supportive, he did have falling out with his sibling. The other thing is that, again, Venus and Mars are again in Uttar Bhadrapada. I mean, this is still chaotic energy here. And he was like all over the place, traveling, da, da, da. But then when you get into Sun, when you get into Revati is more graceful. It's more like about hospitality. It's more peaceful than Venus and Mars, at least the ones in his chart. Like, as Venus had been in Revati, he probably would have been just chilling out, painting, living his life. Um, but this was still stormy for him on some level. he was close, there was a storm there, but he took a step back. So that's why instead of being the artist, he was the art dealer, you see. So, so he has this life-focused yoga in the Pisces. A Malavya yoga, that's this Venus exalted in a Kendra. Kamsa yoga, that's Jupiter Swa in a Kendra. Those are Panchamaha Purusha yoga. So he did have power here. He didn't have money though, because Saturn's debilitated, in the 11th house. So income was a problem. But yeah, so this focus on daily activity, work, also workaholic, I would say, because it's Sun and Mars, it's two fire planets with Venus. This is where that prolificness comes through, power and status. So, he didn't have a lot of money, but he was well reputed. Uh, then the second house lord is his moon. So unstable, even destructive family, speech, assets. I mean, he was living in poverty, even though he was producing a lot of artwork. He was living in poverty in the last few years of his life. The third house lord is Sun. So this is like potentially his brother. Because he was the oldest child. So there were probably some other siblings, older siblings that passed on from this 11th house. But the third house, this is probably his gracious younger brother, Theo, who helped him out quite a bit. But you see this Jupiter and Ketu aspecting here again. So he also was quite a letter writer, and that would be coming from the third house here, but prolific, and also his hands, like his dexterity. The other thing, he had another issue. So besides hurting himself by cutting his ear, he also at some point was in love with some woman, and his family was just like, no, don't pursue it or don't get involved or whatever. And so he protested by literally putting his hand in a flame. So he literally would like hurt himself, like physically, um, you know, self-destruct essentially. I mean, internally and externally, would do these things to harm himself essentially. Then the fourth house lord is Mercury, aspected by Sun, because Venus is debilitated in Virgo here. And then a combust. Oh, that's the other thing, is Mars is combust. So there's going to be a lot of internal fighting and struggle here in Uttar. So that was another thing. I didn't know that, how he died. Apparently, he shot himself in the chest, and he did it in such a way that he didn't actually hit anything like a vital organ. It kind of passed through him or something. And so he could walk. He did this out in the field. They didn't explain why, so I don't know why. I don't know if they know, anybody knows why, but he shot himself in the chest. He was about 37 years old. He was well enough to walk some amount of steps or whatever. Somebody found him. A local doctor who was familiar with gunshot wounds from the war helped him, but he essentially died from an infection from the gunshot wound. Not the gunshot wound itself, like a couple days later. Okay. So all of that, you can see here in the fourth house here, because this Mercury is so, Mercury's bringing medical attention. Mercury's an Ashwini, that can indicate like medical stuff or rescuing type stuff. But Mercury's so compromised because it's with this debilitated Saturn. And also the fourth house not only represents the chest, but happiness. There's going to be a lot of unhappiness here. Home, he kept changing houses. I couldn't even keep track of how often he moved. It was like several times a year. So even in that regard, like not a lot of stability. Also, when he was a kid, when he was running Venus, his Venus owns the 12th house of, again, expenditures, losses, but also isolated foreign places. His family kept sending him to boarding schools far away, and then he would get more unstable mentally and, emotionally. So, yeah, not, in some regards, his family, except for Theo, his brother, seemed pretty supportive, but otherwise his family was kind of hands off. It seemed like kind of distant a bit. We're trying to be logical, but maybe not completely understanding of the depth of his mental illness. So yeah, and then this gunshot wound, self-inflicted gunshot wound, this happened during his moon dasha. So Sun was when he was getting more active as an artist and starting to do well. And then basically the beginning of his moon dasha is when it all fell apart for him, which is not surprising given how unstable, this moon, gandanta, debilitated, close to K2, and Jupiter also gandanta were. Okay. But there's still some grace here, right? Because Jupiter is exalted, or Jupiter is suave, Venus is exalted. So, yeah. Fifth house lord is Venus. It's aspected by exalted Saturn, Mercury, and Mars. Again, gifted thoughts regarding technical production of art, and he was an art dealer advisor for a while before he was just the artist. The sixth house lord is a Mars, which again we know is its combust and its planetary war. And then we have a gandanta moon. So not only is moon unstable, but this whole sixth house is unstable. This could also be him fighting with all kinds of people, even friends or whatever. The other thing is this unstable moon. Moon represents nourishment. So apparently, especially towards the end of his life, he was in really bad shape physically because he wasn't really eating. Like they said, he was just basically subsisting on bread and alcohol and cigarettes or something like that. So he was malnourished. So, not very nurturing, or steady habits here to support himself. What else? And again, the mental instability keeps coming up. Seventh house Lord Swa Gandanta Bhavat Bhavam Jupiter. So Jupiter, besides being these things I've already mentioned, is also Bhavat Bhavam. It's the 10th house Lord and has gone 10 houses away. So that means like one project or one endeavor after another. That's him being an independent art dealer or artist. But again, it all kind of, there's a lot of grace because he had so many projects. But again, with Jupiter and Ketu being in Mula, this would show potentially that there are a lot of projects, but he didn't really accumulate any wealth from them, which is true. Like of 2,000 or something paintings, I didn't realize it was this. I didn't know it was to this degree. He had something like 2,000 paintings, and only one of them sold while he was alive. I was like, wow. I mean, that's like, who does that? Somebody who is very, workaholic and mentally unbalanced. And again, the sun in Revati. The other thing is the career. Again, sun represents career. And Revati. Revati is a very hospitable energy and very much contrasting to almost all these other energies here. Like Rahu is, is in Mrigashirsha. I mean, that's a gentle energy, but again, it's not settled. It's like the deer seeking through the forest type energy. Moon is in Jesta, Jupiter and Ketu and Mula. These are very hardcore, destructive energies. Venus and Mars are in Uttar Bhadrapada. I mean, again, destruction, chaos. Mercury's in Ashwini, Saturn's in Kritika. Like, the kind of soft spot in this whole chart is the sun in Revati. So, yeah. So again, I think that's why this painting was like his only solace, is what I'm seeing here, based on this. But so the seventh house, getting back there, much unusual activity, entrepreneur. Yeah, it's a big, because the seventh house is independent business. Many gigs, but erratic, not seeing commensurate wages. And also, he was a missionary for a while. And then again, he didn't really make any money from his art while he was alive, but posthumously, his paintings are some of the most expensive, or most valuable these days. And then let's see, eighth and ninth house are both, the lord of both those houses is debilitated Saturn. So again, the eighth house is deep psychology, more instability, mental instability, and then shifting between fighting and nurturing here. Because again, he was a dual guy. Like he would nurture his art, but he would fight with everybody around him, even his family and his friends and stuff. The Saturn aspects, even though Saturn's debilitated, it is aspecting the eighth house here. And this can be like longevity. I don't think, like, clearly not physical longevity for him, but I think this is like living on beyond his own, you know, um, physical existence. Like his, like we still talk about him today. Like me talking about Vincent van Gogh. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, sunflowers, I know that painting, or oh, Starry Night, I know that painting. So, yeah, and then also there might be some instability or kind of this kind of nature related to father, government authority, religion. again, he was a missionary for a while, so he was pretty hardcore about it for a while, but then I think they kicked him out. So again, for various reasons, because he would do strange things because of the mental health issues. So I think that he was sort of decommissioned as a missionary. So I don't think that was a soft place for him to land. The 10th house again, we've got all this going on. Swa. Oh, the Lord is a Swa Jupiter, even though it's in 7th house. Sun, exalted Venus, combos, planetary war, Mars. And I would say almost combos, planetary war, Venus. Because Venus was in war with Mars, but like a week after he was born, Venus, because you can see Venus closing in on the sun here, Venus is faster than the sun. Venus goes combust a week later. So essentially both, I mean, at least Venus was visible for this moment in time to allow his art to be visible. Although some of it, I'm guessing a lot of it was not seen. But that also brings like and it also made him this art dealer. But, this is all still very precarious stuff here, this Venus and Mars business here. And then, so the sun, I think, is the only place of respite. So painting was the only thing that I think made him happy. It looks like also traveling. This is like global reputation, controversial because, again, there's fighting here with this Venus, Mars. But he was clearly a gifted artist. I mean, this Venus exalted here, this is going to give him artistic ability, but also a very unusual style, I would say, because Mars is a rebellious planet. And Jupiter, again, the dispositor for Pisces, is in um, Mula, which is a kind of alternative energy, because the star of Mula is Ketu. So not only is Jupiter basically almost in the same degree as Ketu, so Jupiter and Ketu, you kind of see these like energies, integrated here. But Jupiter is in the star of Ketu, and Ketu's in its own star, so Ketu Swa. So this is a very strong Swa, Ketu, which brings a lot of disruptive, unusual energy, for better or worse. So let's see. So place of respite, travel, controversial, gifted, unusual, transform. The other thing is like when I see planets in, especially Uttar Bhadrapada, not necessarily Purva Bhadrapada, but Uttar Bhadrapada, I do tend to think of like reincarnation. Like there's this kind of like letting go, releasing of the tangible physical world, the body, that sort of thing. But again, in Indian culture, the reason why cremation is done is because it helps to separate the soul from the body so that the soul can, move on to its next incarnation. And I remember I also did a analysis of Mickey Mouse, the cartoon character, and his moon is in Uttar Bhadrapada. Okay, so that kind of surprised me. I remember when I did that analysis because I always think of Mickey Mouse as like this happy, sweet character everybody loves, But what it reminded me of is that Mickey himself, the concept of Mickey, has been redone over and over again in so many permutations that basically Mickey has reincarnated many, many times. And so, like, what I was saying here with his artwork was that his work has been, permutated many, many ways since his own existence, since, Van Gogh passed on. Like, it's on posters and it's on schedulers and it's like, screensavers and t-shirts and all this kind of stuff. So there's this like proliferation energy, like again, like almost like a reincarnation energy of his work, not necessarily himself, but his work. And so I was also seeing that here in this term. In the 11th house, I've mentioned the 11th house already, with ear business and the social, chaos business, socializing chaos. Then the 12th house, again, 12th house lord is Venus. And again, he ran Venus when he was young, so he was off isolated, felt isolated when it was sent off to boarding school and stuff like that. The other thing is this moon, is aspect, this debilitated gandanta moon is aspecting here. So looks like the isolation and being away from people who could provide some structure and support for him made things worse. Okay, but this would also potentially bring him international fame. Okay, and it was interesting as I was reading the Wikipedia page on him. This line stood out to me, like lasting icon of the romantic ideal of the tortured artist. And again, what we're starting to see, like again, when we've got this strong, fairly strong Prabhupada yoga, and he only has 3 planets. Again, we are building up to 6, but this is sort of a similar seed idea, especially because again, we have a lot of planets in Uttar Bhadrapada and Purva Bhadrapada. There is this mix of, especially in his mind body world, of a lot of loss and chaos, but also this brilliant, beautiful art. And so, yeah, so just as one example of some of the, again, it's not going to all apply because luckily, we don't have all this going on with the moon, debilitated, gandanta, Jupiter. This chart is much more, if you can imagine it, like in Saturn and Aries instead of Saturn and Aquarius. Like this chart is much more chaotic than what we're dealing with now, but you can see some similarities in terms of the energy. Okay, so what else do we have here? Okay, so on this slide, we're going to look at the 2 fire planets, Sun, Surya, and Moon, Mangal. In March, so March 4th, Sun enters Purva Bhadrapada Nakshatra. So again, we're talking about funeral planner energy again, the more chaotic version. And Sun represents leader, government, authority, father, guru, career. So this could be, big change or end or transition along these lines. And at this point, Sun is still in Aquarius, where it's in a fixed air sign. So this is all about the paradigm of these things, transitioning, passing over, burning up, maybe even potentially literally. Then 12th of March, Sun will cross Saturn. This is going to be a big structural, again, change to the things about leader, government, authority, father, guru, career. March 14th, there's going to be the lunar eclipse. The thing that was the lunar eclipse is the moon is going to be in Leo or Simha. So Sun is still with Saturn. For a little bit before it passes into Pisces, a little bit, on the same day. So even that having that lunar eclipse, on the cusp of Leo, Virgo, and then Aquarius, Jupiter is going to bring, unfortunately more chaos. And when Sun enters, Pisces, that means there are going to be 5 planets in Pisces in either Purva or Uttar Bhadrapada. Okay, a lot of change here. 17th of Mars, Sun crosses Rahu, so there's going to be some unusual leadership step. But luckily, Sun is crossing into Uttar Bhadrapada. So again, there's going to be a little bit more objectivity and trying to sort out this mess or make some, I think, sense of the chaos. March 22nd, Venus crosses Sun. March 24th, Mercury crosses Sun. I would see the previous slides because I've talked about this already. On March 29th, we have the solar eclipse, surya grahan in Pisces. And on that day, they're going to have 6 planets in either Purva, Uttar, Bhadrapada. Again, only 6 planets on the funeral pyre. Resetting or loss of leadership. I mean, literally things might be toast along all these lines because we're having a solar eclipse, so the sun is getting eclipsed here. And most of the planets here, sun is eclipsed, moon is eclipsed. What else is it? Mercury's eclipsed. Rahu, you can't see. What else is in there? The only thing you can see, just barely, because it just got out of combustion by the time the solar eclipse hits, is Venus. So Venus will be there, and then Jupiter. So there will be some grace, luckily. But I think the Venus and the Jupiter are all about reconstruction after some kind of devastating event. And again, this could be not just political, but, um, not just man-made events, but natural events that are occurring here. And again, probably more than one, at least 2, because this is all happening in a dual sign. Yeah, so, oh, and then again, at the end of the solar eclipse, like within a few hours of the solar eclipse, Saturn is switching signs. So Saturn's going to join the party in Pisces. And Saturn, again, delays, obstacles, structure, antiquity. So again, there's going to be a recon happening after the devastation. There are no changes to Mars during March. It's going to be in Gemini Mithuna, which is an enemy sign. That's not super great for Mars, so it's going to make Mars more erratic. And Gemini is a dual air sign, so it's kind of like, trying to figure out what to do because the mind is shifting. You can't figure out what to do. Create a strong, solid forward action. And it's in Purnavasi, so again, that revolving energy. So a revolving door of aggressive, conflicting ideas. Um, It is aspecting K2 in Virgo. Mars and K2 again bring a chaotic, explosive energy to Virgo, which is a dual Earth sign. And all these planets in Pisces are aspecting, Virgo. So even though I keep talking about, planets in Pisces, you have to realize that, like, actually, in some ways, there's even more destructive energy going on in Virgo because you don't have that parivartana between Venus and Jupiter. They're doing some level of protection, even though it might seem minimal. Um, yeah, and the other thing is that Mercury owns both Gemini and Virgo, where Mars is, and Mars is reflecting. And Mercury's debilitated, although it's nicha bhanga, and it's going to be in Purva and Uttara Bhadrapada for most of the month. So that's not a strong dispositor, for Mars. So again, Mars isn't shifting, but Mars is still wobbling here, I would say. Okay, so here's another chart. This one's for Wilhelm Röntgen, who discovered X-rays in 1895. So he's a scientist. He was born March 27th, 1845, 1600 p.m., Lennep, Germany. The Lagna Nakshatra is Purva Falguni, so he liked to enjoy himself as well. Sun Nakshatra is Uttara Bhadrapada, so bringing order to chaos. So you've been talking about that. The Moon Nakshatra is an Anurada, so that's victory through building alliances. Day Lord Jupiter or our Lord Venus. A compassionate and generous person, I would say, especially because you can see Jupiter and Venus are in this Pravraja Yoga in Pisces in the 8th house. So instead of his Pravraja being in the 10th house of daily work, activity and reputation, his Pravraja is in the 8th house of deep psychology, but also research. So this is where all of his energy went. Okay. But Venus and Jupiter together, again, being there, this is going to be more compassionate than the Raja Yoga we saw in Vincent van Gogh's chart. There's going to be more grace here. And I guess I'll just mention it now since we're sort of on that topic. Like, even though he developed, discovered X-rays and he could have patented all this stuff and made $1 gazillion and hoarded it all for himself, he refused to patent any of his discoveries because he felt like it was more important that there was public knowledge and public access to them. I mean, that's a pretty generous, high-minded individual. And that you can see because, again, this 8th house is just stellar. I mean, exalted Venus, Swa, Jupiter in the 8th house. This is a very, again, just generous, high-minded person here. So anyway, the birth dasha, Saturn, Moon, Venus are picking up some of this Venus energy, but also Saturn is in Capricorn here in the 6th house. So Saturn can be losses and delays, obstacles, structure also, but Moon and Venus are the two like emotional planets. Now Venus here, I believe, is in. Let me just double check. Where's Venus? Venus is. I want to say Purva Bhadrapada. So Venus is in Purva Bhadrapada. This could be like loss of loved ones. Okay, and Saturn aspecting here, kind of like. It's almost like Saturn is in there. So it's almost like you have Mars is in there too. So there's a lot of structure going on here. Okay, with this 8th house. This could be like this Saturn is like creating some sort of structure or order to the loss of loved ones. Okay. And this could be like the, with Saturn and Mars together, you often get an engineering combination. So that's the thing is like his discovery of X-rays, it actually developed into something very tangible and practical, like, having the ability to do X-ray a hand or a back or whatever. that gave, doctors some ability to maybe see what was really going on and provide better treatment or faster treatment, that sort of thing. So Saturn is in a nakshatra called Dhanishta. Dhanishta is symbolized by a drum. So this is sort of like order, structure, like pace, even. So bringing some, again, order to this long-term issues going on here in the eighth house, because the eighth house is also, despite being, deep psychology, is also like long-term chronic issues as well. So what else? And his chart recreates the current sky pattern because Mars is in Gemini, or aspecting Gemini. And then we've got Mercury, Venus, Sun, Jupiter, Saturn energy in Pisces. So that's almost like our current Prabhaja yoga here. In slightly, created slightly differently, but that's essentially what we're building up to. We're just missing a moon, or we're swapping Mars for moon. So that's going to make this more energetic than moon would be. But there you go. Okay, so the Lugna is Leo or Simha. It's a fixed fire sign. Usually this brings leadership, somebody just being a Leo, typically. But as I would say with all of these planets around Sun, this is a well-supported leader here. So had a lot of resources available to him. I believe his family was pretty well off, and he had a lot of resources, like research resources, to help him out as well. And the sun is an Uttar so again, bringing order to chaos. The sun has gone to the eighth house, which is Moksha, so his primary, even though he liked to enjoy himself, that Uttar was a Purva Falguni energy in his Lugna. Moksha was about freedom, so this is about like freedom from loss of loved ones here, which is what his medical discovery essentially brought to the world. And he was the first person to receive a Nobel Prize for Physics because of his work. So let's see. So the Sun is with an exalted Venus, Purvadrapada, Combust, debilitated, nicha, bhanga, Combust, planetary war, Mercury, and a Swa, Jupiter. So Mercury and Jupiter were Combust and in war. You can see how close they were. So this is like arguing of ideas. This is like sorting through ideas here. Okay. But this would provide, and Jupiter was in Revati, so again, this is going to provide some grace here to all of this, because Venus, Revati is the gentlest, kindest nakshatra of the three that are in Pisces here. So alternative mindset, a master of research, competing, refined ideas, sorting through all that, conclusions, research, practical advice, changing pace of people, dying is what I'm saying here. Yeah. So in his chart, we've got several yogas: Pravraja, Buddhaditya, Kalasarpa yoga. So focus, intelligence, especially science and math, and ambition. Okay. The second house lord is Mercury. It's aspecting its own house plus these three other planets. So somebody who could like talk or debate different issues, because he's like sorting through ideas here. I would say fairly shy because Mercury's combust. But a leader in preventing death through invisible ideas. So the second house can be like technology and physics, which is what he was all about. And that's where all this, lovely energy is showing up in his second and eighth house here. Well-off family, yeah, so that's all there. Third house lord is Venus, aspected by an exalted Saturn. So he was a pretty regimented writer, I'm guessing. All of his notes, or maybe he was also a letter writer like Van Gogh. The fourth house lord is Mars. He's got Moon and Rahu and Anurata. Ambitious family line, probably mother, although Moon has Digbala here, and it's debilitated. So, he had fairly obsessive mind, it looks like, but was, his moon isn't that far from the moon of Vincent van Gogh, but is an Anurata, which is victorious and building social alliances. The moon in the next nakshatra of Jyesta, still debilitated, and very close to the Rahu Ketu axis for both of them. Again, these planets are in positive nakshatras as opposed to Jesta and Mula, which are very destructive nakshatras for Van Gogh. And I think the saving grace for Van Gogh as well is not just that Venus was exalted and Jupiter was Swa, but that he actually ran Venus and Sun. And then when he started running Moon, things really went downhill fast for him. So it's not just what planets you have. Again, the chart will give you potential, but then the dasha, if you watch my dasha video, intro to the planetary sequence, planetary periods, and dasha sequence, it's also all about like which planets you run at which phases of your life. So, fourth, yeah, it is. Okay, fifth house here. Fifth house lord is Jupiter, bhavat, bhavam, Mars. So, and Purvachana. So, this is the ninth lord of going 9 houses away. So this is like one leadership position after another, one project after another. And he bounced around all these different universities and he got like the department chair position for all of them. So that ain't too shabby. And then leading multiple organizations, authority. So leader of leaders, I would say. The sixth house lord, Swa, Saturn. Very regimented daily schedule, I would say. Like probably very structured in what he did. The other thing is the sixth house can be like adopted children, and he did adopt a female child from one of his brothers who passed on. So that's there. And again, 10th constellation of Capricorn, that's a female, feminine type of constellation. And Saturn is kind of neutral. So when you have Saturn in Capricorn related to children, you would kind of expect a female child. So that all fits. The seventh house lord is Swa Saturn. So it's a strong dispositor, but it's gone to the sixth house. So this actually makes sense because his, independent business, as far as it was an independent business, even though he was supported by governments and universities and stuff like that, probably government money through there, was all about trying to create some different structural reality or some structured, item like an X-ray that would help with acute issues. So, like, again, if you fell down and you could get an X-ray of it, that would potentially help the doctors know how better to treat you and maybe treat you faster, rather than just guess. Sometimes you can't guess from the superficial part of things. So, so I would say structured relationships. There might have also been an interest in classical music because Saturn's in Danishta, or maybe his wife was interested in classical music. That could be it. Eighth house, Lord, Swa, Jupiter, plus Sun, Saturn, Mercury, Venus. So art and passion of science, sorting through ideas, bankruptcy. He did experience bankruptcy late in life. He also experienced colorectal cancer, which this could be because all this energy here in the eighth house could do something like that. The eighth house represents like the lower GI and also a sexual system. And again, his generosity, though, because the eighth house also represents psychology. He never panned its work. He wanted to make sure it would stay public. They maintained public property. Ninth house here, again, the Lord is Mars, advisor to multiple organizations. The 10th house lord is Venus, and he's got Ketu and Kritika with a bright moon. So again, fighting and nurturing unusual ideas. Because Kritika can be like critical as well. So there's some unusual activity here. But like again, Venus, since the Lord is Venus, Venus is going to draw eighth house issues. So all this research into his 10th house of fame, reputation, and daily work as well. So the K2 is going to bring the like, which ideas are we going to nurture and continue, or which ones are we going to cross off the list in terms of what's feasible and workable and realistic with what the science is showing. Then the 11th house lord is Mercury, aspected by Mars. I would say various research groups he was involved in. 12th house lord is Moon, aspected by a debilitated Mars and Saturn. So again, Saturn and Mars together can bring engineering. So this is, I think, his mechanical remote lab or place that he worked, where he was working all this stuff out with his cathode ray tubes and all this kind of stuff that he used. This could be physical losses of emotional, physical losses as well. Like maybe he lost some land. Maybe that was the bankruptcy problem that happened. And also, when he was young, he traveled abroad as a youth. Um, so he ran, because Saturn, he was in. So after Saturn comes Mercury, Moon. I'm not sure about that. I forget his story, but there was some traveling around as a youth, and so again, Saturn would bring that because he was running Saturn dasha. Yeah, I think that was probably it. I was thinking more about the moon, but I don't think it's the moon that gave him that traveling while he was a youth. It was the Saturn, because Saturn's a long period, and he ran it while he was pretty young. So yeah, again, discovered X-rays in 1895. That was during his Venus dasha, which again, pretty strong here for both the 10th house of reputation, daily work, and also this research house. First to receive the Physics Nobel Prize, chair of physics department of various universities. And his first X-ray, was interesting, was of his wife's hand. I thought that was kind of cute, actually. So, but again, another example of a Raja yoga. And again, even in his life, maybe not as extreme as Van Gogh, but there was a lot of beauty that was created from this conglomeration of planets. But there was a lot of like losses, and there's a big price to pay for it as well. Like you get both extremes, and again, we're in a dual, sign where all this, is energy, planetary energy is building. But here's just another example of it. Alrighty, so let's see what else we have. Okay, so Moon Chandra transits in March. Again, the two big events, probably big events for the month, are the eclipses. They're happening on March 14th and March 29th. Again, for more background on eclipses, I've got a couple of videos: lunar solar eclipses, Chandra Surya grahan, and auspicious timing of eclipses at Muhurta. If you want to learn more about them generally. March 14th, though, there's going to be a lunar eclipse in Leo or Simha. Again, the eclipse is going to straddle the Leo, Aquarius, Pisces, Virgo axis, so it's almost like 4 signs are involved instead of 2. Also, Sun is aspecting its own sign of Leo. That'll bring some strength. That'll be nice because Sun will aspect Leo. That'll protect it a bit. Saturn is in Aquarius. That'll protect it a bit. Mercury's aspecting Virgo, which will protect it a bit, and Jupiter and Venus are in Pisces, which will protect it a bit. So that's kind of nice, but again, what that means is that the protection, though, is going to be more along the lines of like physical assets rather than like human relationships. So, especially with Saturn and Sun and Saturn, they're going to be in Purva Bhadrapada by the time this lunar eclipse happens. Again, Sun representing father, authority, general health, government. On the funeral pyre, with Saturn, which is like bureaucracy, employees. So this is going to be, unfortunately, kind of a pretty destructive energy against some protection, but not a whole lot. And then the moon is going to be involved there. Moon, I believe, is going to be in Uttara Falguni. Yeah, it should be, because it's so close to the axis there. So that's going to be enjoyment, but with a purpose. But the moon is going to be eclipsed, so that could be like loss of public support. Okay. Then, for all this, like, again, power dynamic, because essentially that's what it is. Like Sun and Saturn are like almost diametrically opposed energies. So Sun is again like the king or the president, and Saturn's like the servant or employee, and it's almost like um, back in the fall, when Sun was in Leo and directly opposing Saturn in Aquarius. That's when we had a lot of strikes going on. So again, that power dynamic of like administration versus like day-to-day workers and stuff going on. So sort of like some version of that is sort of going on here. Yeah. Then March 29th, the solar eclipse is happening in Pisces, which I've essentially been talking about this whole time. 6 grahas in Purva Uttar Bhadrapada. So again, 6 out of 9 planets on the funeral pyre, resetting, and kind of a loss of leadership, I would say. And you can only see at that time because sun is eclipsed, moon is eclipsed, Rahu you never see, Mercury's combust. You only see Venus, and then Saturn enters. So Venus again is strong, but then Saturn's going to kind of come through and um, almost like a bulldozer, and start reconstructing after devastation. 'Cause Saturn is going to be in Purva Bhadrapada, so this might be the sort of like final flattening of whatever issues have been going on, so that a new reality can be built here. But there's going to be dual tangible results and emotional results because we're Pisces, a dual water sign. Also Venus, so there's some practical, tangible advising going on here that's hopefully helpful to all that's going on. And again, the eclipse is going on the Virgo Pisces axis, which are the natural 6 and 12 houses. So acute issues, daily schedules, enemies obvious and hidden, and losses as well. So also, again, I'm just covering these briefly here. I'm going to be doing whole separate videos where I go into depth on each of the eclipses. So keep a watch out for that later on in the month. Then on this slide, we have Jupiter, Guru, Saturn, Shani, Rahu, Ketu transits in March. March 2nd, Mercury crosses Rahu. Again, strange, unusual decisions might be going on. March 12th, Sun crosses Saturn. This could be a clash of boss and employees, a restructuring of leadership, administration. March 14th, the lunar eclipse I've mentioned. March 16th, Rahu enters Purva Nakshatra. This might get kind of nasty, folks, really. Because again, right now Rahu's in Uttar Bhadrapada, which again is a funeral pyre, but there's some order, some objectivity going on here. Once it gets into Purva Bhadrapada, it's kind of like it's all going up in smoke. And Rahu, again, is a natural malefic planet. It's going to bring the more malefic energies from the nakshatra forward. So this could be like unusual, like endings of things. Okay, this could be very destructive, frankly. Okay, then March 17th, Sun crosses Rahu right after that. So this could be multiple unusual changes to authority, health, career. March 29th, there's going to be a solar eclipse in Pisces, which I've been talking about. But here I want to talk about more from the Saturn side. So Saturn leaves combustion. It's combust right now, which, if believe it or not, is probably making things a little bit better because we can't see the outer effects of Saturn and Purva Bhadrapada. But it's going to pop up, again. So we are going to see more destructive energy from Saturn in Pisces, like right, basically a few hours, within a few hours of the eclipse. So we're going to have Rahu and Saturn in Purva Bhadrapada in Pisces. That's a lot of destructive energy. Just those two. With Venus and Jupiter there, that'll take the edge off a bit, but not completely. Okay. So that's the Saturn, in Purva Bhadrapada is going to add more destructive energy. This whole Pisces Virgo lineup eclipse situation. And from once Saturn enters Pisces, now we're going to have Saturnian energy in Taurus, Virgo, and Sagittarius. And Saturn's the slowest moving planet, so that new reality of Saturn is going to be there until June of 2027. And they're going to be, again, Saturn represents obstacles, delays, that sort of thing. So whatever obstacles and delays you've been dealing with for 2.5 years, those might be getting better to some degree. Probably quite a bit. But there's going to be the obstacles are going to shift. The other thing that happens when Saturn enters Pisces, as I mentioned, I think on the slide with the first and last, the charts for the first and last of the month, is Saturn is going to be dragging on Venus and Jupiter because it's in the same sign, and there's signs of Taurus, which Venus owns, and Sagittarius Pisces, which Jupiter owns. And this is going to happen until May 14th when Jupiter switches signs. At least Jupiter will not, be under the spell, or under the influence of Saturn. And then Venus doesn't change until May 31st. So Saturn is going to drag on the benefic energies of these two planets. So yeah, it might be a bit of a slog for a couple months here after, even post eclipse. There's no changes in Jupiter. It's going to stay in Taurus and in Rohini, so that's kind of nice because that's a really nice nakshatra. So this should be providing some grace, and also, Taurus is a fixed Earth sign, so some stability here. And Jupiter is a planet representing spirituality, so it may be that the stability that's being brought into the situation is more spiritual. Okay, with all this emotional turmoil going on. Also, there's going to be no changes in K2. So it's going to stay in Virgo, where it's an Uttara Falguni. The only thing, though, is that it's aspected by Mars, which those two together create explosive energy. Like I've mentioned before, when Mercury and, or not Mercury, Mars and K2 have come together, um, it's created something that's like when Mars crossed K2 a couple years ago. That's when Israel got bombed, and then last fall, when there was some alignment of Mars and K2, that's when the cell phones and walkie-talkies were blown up in Lebanon. Um, yeah, so we do have Mars and K2 together in Virgo, so there's going to be some dual changeable changes there, and then all the aspects coming from, you know, Venus, Mercury, Sun, Saturn, Moon, and again, most of these planets are in the Uttara. So, we've got to watch, even though we keep talking about Pisces, you got to remember the other end of it in Virgo. Okay, so what else do we have? Okay, we have one more chart. And you can see this is the biggest pravraja, again, in Pisces. We've got Venus, Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, almost like what we've got coming up here. And this is a chart for the first St. Patrick's Day parade. I thought this was kind of a funny and interesting chart. So yeah, even this chart for a parade has this big pravraja. So there you go. So when was the first St. Patrick's Day parade? Well, 17th of March, 1762. I don't know the exact time, but it was in New York, New York. So this, because I don't have an exact time, this is a Chandra Lugna chart, so a moon rising chart. I oriented towards the moon at the top here. So this first St. Patrick's Day parade happened before the United States was actually its own independent country. The Declaration of Independence wasn't signed until 1776. So Lugna Nakshatra we don't know because we don't have a birth time. Sun Nakshatra, Uttar Bhadrapada. So again, what are we talking about there? We're talking about order, some leader who brings order to chaos. The moon nakshatra. Well, the moon is in Mula, and we've talked about that with on Go's chart. So the moon potentially can be in a destructive energy. There can be some public loss here. Okay, it's not gandanta. At least it's a few degrees into Sagittarius here. So this could be about planting new public ideas. And the reason why ideas is in Sagittarius is kind of related to philosophy. Okay. So the day lord is Mercury, the hour lord, I don't know. The birth dasha was K2 until about 11 o'clock at night, but I know they weren't doing the parade late at night. So, yeah, so we're running K2 again, unusual energy here. The other thing is Mercury, Moon being in Mula. Mula is is in the star of K2. So there is this, again, erratic, kind of rebellious energy coming through this chart. Okay. This chart is related to the current sky pattern because we have Mars and K2 together, and this time it's in Libra, not in Virgo, but they're together. Mars is aspecting Capricorn, which it's currently doing, and where it's exalted. K2 has 5-9 aspects again. And what else? Oh wait, let me double check on that. So sorry, Rahu is 5-9 aspects. Okay, do I gotta change that? Um, so that's actually different. I need to change that. But Venus, Mercury, Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pisces aspecting Virgo. That we have going there. So take a look house by house. Okay, so the Chandra Lagna, again, we have a Sagittarius Danu rising chart here. It's a dual fire sign, Dosambhava Agni. There's a dark moon in Mula, aspected by planetary war Saturn. Got more planetary wars going on here. And in Revati, at least there's some grace here going on with Saturn. And it's also aspected by Rahu in Bharani. So this you could see is like literally a death because Mula can represent death, destruction, and Saturn also represents these things. But there's this kind of like this might be death of like a person or a body, but you could almost see this too as like a spiritual birth of kinds. Also, this is about traditional hospitality, the Saturn Revati. So the reason why, so I wasn't very familiar, so it was interesting to read the history on this. But the first St. Patrick's Day parade, again, this was happening before, the independence of the United States. This was a bunch of ex, kind of expatriate or not expatriate, but yeah, I guess expatriate Irish people, a lot of whom were part of the military, who were supporting the British Army in the United States, and they were feeling homesick and that sort of thing, and they wanted to show their support, and pride, national pride on St. Patrick's Day. So St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland, and part of the reason why is that he introduced Christianity to the country. So what I'm seeing here is St. Patrick's Day. I didn't realize this, but St. Patrick's Day is not the birth of St. Patrick, but this is his day of death. So apparently, in the Christian tradition, when they have a day, a saint's day, it's based on their death because it's not their birth into the material world; it's their birth into the spiritual or heavenly world. So I thought that was very interesting. So that could be like the moon and Mula. This is like with Saturn. This could be the loss, public loss, public mourning, traditional, traditional kind of holiday or observance of public mourning, of the saints. Okay. So I think that's what's going on here. So it was kind of interesting that at the top we have this moon and Mula. So there are planting of new seeds, and the new seeds are not just like, you know, on some degree, there was this traditional like observance of the day, St. Patrick's Day, but then there was also some new and unusual things that happened. Like, because again, a lot of these people who were organizing this is all volunteers. They were somehow related to the military. Uh, uh, but the other thing is like they were doing things differently as well. Like they were wearing like the color green, which apparently was not seen as a positive thing at the time. I think for various reasons. Some of it might be political. I was reading different stories, so I don't know what the whole thing of it was, but some of it was potentially political. Some of it also was like it was thought that green wasn't like a auspicious color or something like that. So the other thing is that there was a lot of discrimination against Irish people, even back then, before United States became its own country. Yeah, it was thought that, Irish people were kind of coming in and taking over jobs and that sort of thing. And so a lot of people weren't very overt about their Irish background. So this was a chance for them to be very loud and proud in public about their Irish, background and that sort of thing, and also wear the color green and, just sort of escape some of the restrictions or, of them being so publicly, identified as being Irish. Okay. Yeah. So that's where the tradition comes in, but again, it's tradition mixed with some new version. So it's again, there's a duality here of action of again observing St. Patrick's Day, because in like in Ireland, it's a fairly solemn day, but in the United States, like at least now, which I don't think it was the same back then, but now, like people drink green beer and they go out and they party and they drink a lot and, that sort of thing. Like, I don't know how much it actually has to do with St. Pat, the actual saint Patrick, but nowadays, but, um, it's like, it's considered to be like a fun, light holiday. It's sort of been secularized that way. But, and I think there was some, clearly some enjoyment here, but it was also like, there's also some structure here as well. Like it's more strict, even though it's still, I think to this day, the largest parade in the world and longest and oldest parade in the world. Like they don't have floats in the parade, like the Thanksgiving Day parade that Macy's does in New York. Like there's these big balloons of like cartoon characters and stuff, and they fly down the street, and everybody likes to see the different cartoon characters. Like there's no floats or anything like that in these parades. Like it's literally marching. So again, there's more of this like structured, um, kind of a streamlined version, which makes sense because the 10th house here is Virgo. It's a very like orderly, like it's a dual earth sign. It's a very orderly, you know, um, structured type of house here, the 10th house of daily activity, which is when forming these lines of people marching synchronously and that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so again, it was like, sort of social, but also, religious at the same time. Anyway, the Lugnatia is a swa planetary war Jupiter in Revati. So Jupiter and Saturn, even though they're at war, they're both in Revati, so there's still some grace here. And Jupiter again represents spirits and Saturn religion, but Jupiter also represents like teacher. So I think this was literally Saint Patrick, like an old spiritual teacher, or traditional spiritual teacher, Saint Patrick. Yeah. Um, and the Lugnatia has gone to the fourth house, which is a moksha stana. So again, freedom. So this is like liberating the liberation of an old traditional spiritual leader. And then you also have an exalted combust. All these things are so complex. Exalted combust Venus and a debilitated nicha Mercury with Sun, and they're all in uccha. So again, there's the funeral pyre, right? There's the releasing of the soul, but like a conscious release of the soul. Um, yeah, of this, traditional spiritual leader. So this again, when I'm seeing this as the background for the moon in Mula, this is like, the sort of, and like with the Wilhelm Röntgen chart, or even the Van Gogh chart, I was talking about like this Uttar can symbolize like almost like a reincarnation, and it's not like reincarnation the way I think Indians think about it, certainly. But this is like, his spirit like living on beyond the demise of his body, still influencing people. Probably, with the green beer, he wasn't thinking along those lines, but at least I'm sure some people have a more traditional view of him, but yeah. So all this together, spiritual, religious tradition, and again, the fourth house here, this is like family line, spiritual line here, and there's all this like, Jupiter, Swan, Saturn, and Revati. This is a very strong, religious background here. Mixed emotions here. So again, there's a loss of a saint, but also, there's a celebration here as well. Um, Death of a compassionate spiritual leader. That's another way to read this. Also, Christianity. Usually, when I see Jupiter in Pisces, so Swa and Pisces, especially in Revati, I tend to think of Christianity. Kind of like when I see Mercury in its own sign, I think of Buddhism. or Saturn in its own sign. I think of like Indian religions like Hinduism and Sikhism, Jainism, that sort of thing. So anyway, the other thing though is that all of these, the fourth house represents the past, and the 10th house can represent the future. So all these planets on the 4-10 axis here, this is like bridging the past with the future. This is like the new, not just the sort of rebirth or the spiritual birth of a older, traditional spiritual leader, but this is like the new kind of virgin birth of how are we going to celebrate this moving forward? Because they weren't having parades in Ireland. I mean, this is a whole like new twist on the, way to observe the day. And that's that Rahu. So at the top. So bridging the past and the future with some new tradition, like the old tradition with the new. And again, there's a Pravraja yoga here, so life focus. Saraswati yoga here. That's Venus, Mercury, Jupiter all together. That's a creative yoga. There's a Buddhaditya yoga here. So although it's not qualified, but that's like some like intelligence here. Um, yeah. So this is a pretty big thing that they wanted to put together here. I do have the yogi, avayogi, and duplicate yogi. So the yogi's Rahu. So there's some wealth here in the 5th house. And this is like a public stage or performance, which it was. And then Aviyogi's Venus. So there's some loss there. And then Saturn. So Venus is the lord of the 11th house of income. But Saturn is the lord of the 2nd house of assets. So there's some, you know, both both things going on here, like some wealth, but also I think this was like an attempt to show wealth or demonstrate wealth or demonstrate solidarity, like even the wealth of not necessarily being like dollars or well, they didn't have cars and horses back then, I guess horses or whatever, like material assets, so to speak. But the material assets were this small but growing group of Irish people. Yeah. So let's look at the other house. So the second house, second lord was the sun, aspected by an exalted Mars. So again, and this is in Swati, so this is like a new energy burgeoning. Swati is symbolized by new growing grass blowing in the wind. So it's kind of like an unstable thing here. But Saturn again and Mars here, this is like a innovative, tangible, physical expression of wealth. Like people marching the street like this, like it's a show, it's a demonstration of strength. And again, the assets I think were the people, and again, the second house is also family, inner circle. Like this is a pretty tight knit group of people gathering from the chart. New way of communicating in a physical way. Military families, also assets and land. This is all probably involved here. And you did need some assets to actually put this show together here. Then the third house lord is Saturn. It's aspected by K2. No, I've got to change that. Hold on. Okay, sorry I had to correct something. Not sure where I left off. I think it was around the third house. So the third house lord is Saturn. And so, again, there's some, third house represents siblings and neighbors and friends and some stuff like that. And the 11th house or the third house is in the sign of Aquarius. So this is like ideological neighbors and friends. So this may not literally be, you live side by side next to somebody, but, in their mind, heart, spirits, like these people are pretty close here, because of their background. Because you have the, second house lord and third house lord, Saturn, um, you know, um, coming from the fourth house of family line, spiritual line, and that sort of thing. So it's more the place and religion and background that's bringing these second house groups and third house groups together. Then the fourth house lord is a Swa Jupiter, and you've got these four other planets there. So this is a focus on celebrating the past, spiritual leader, I would say, and coming from that spiritual, background or religious background. Then the fifth house lord is Mars. It's aspect its own sign, and Rahu here. This is a very strong display, new display of an ambitious display of physical might, I would say. That's what it does. It draws your attention. You get a bunch of people marching in a line, down the street. It's like that doesn't happen every day, right? Everybody's usually just sort of milling around doing their own thing. But it shows unity and support. Then the sixth house lord is Venus. It's aspected by Saturn and Mars. So again, this could be a public or starting new but enduring activity. And there's a lot of work. There's a lot of engineering that goes into this. I mean, it takes the one that they have now. I mean, the one now is sometimes they have up to 250,000 people who participate in the parade, not just the spectators. That's a lot of people marching down the street. I mean, that takes a lot of effort to organize all that. So there is a big engineering effort, is what I'm saying here. Also, Mars and Saturn together can be military. So again, this could be like a military effort. Like a very organized situation. And seventh house lord is Mercury, aspected by Moon. So this is like an unusual, inner thoughts, public victory here, I would say. Developing here, because I believe, Mercury's combust at this time, so you can't necessarily see this. So again, it's like, even though it may not have been explicitly stated, just the effort to organize an event like this was clearly meant to send a message. Yeah, but through physical means, the physical showing up of people and rows of lines marching down the street or whatever. Then the eighth house lord is Moon, aspected by Jupiter where it's exalted. So I think this is like, again, reminiscing about spiritual traditions here. Like there is some spiritual um, glue here that's uniting all these people. Yeah. And their, interest in doing something like this. Then the 10th house lord is, oh, sorry, I skipped ninth house. Ninth house lord is Sun. It's aspected by Rahu. So again, there's some ambition here with the leading institution, and also ambition with even the leader that they're honoring here, St. Patrick. I mean, because he had to travel so far, and then I think when he showed up in Ireland, very few people were interested in Christianity, and by the time his time was over, most of the country had converted to Christianity or something like that. So it was a big, successful and ambitious but successful missionary project for St. Patrick. Then the 10th house lord is Mercury, aspect its own, there's debilitated Venus, Sun, Jupiter, Sun. So again, this is not going to be a parade with a lot of bells and whistles and frills, and it's not like if you've ever been to one, the gay pride parade, they've got the best music. They're dancing and singing, and they got colorful costumes and all this kind of stuff. This is not that parade. I mean, this is much more buttoned up, much more strict and straight, and again, they don't have floats and I mean, I think the only music they had was traditional music like bagpipes and stuff, like traditional Irish music, but you know, um, I think it more buttoned up and straight laced. I don't know if it is today. I haven't seen one of the St. Patrick's Day parades in a while, but uh, at least back then it was much more like I think serious. They were probably not as serious or solemn as Ireland itself, but you know, not too far removed from that either. I don't think. Um, so yeah, so all this in the 10th house: dual, practical, tangible, orderly, creative activity. So there's some creativity here. The dualness, maybe there were two lines of people marching down the street. I'm guessing who did this, or maybe two groups. But there's something dual about this first parade here. Then the 11th house lord is Venus. There's a retrograde Mars there with K2. So this is going to be explosive energy, like I mentioned. So again, this might be a successful launch of like a displaced or lost social group. So again, all these Irish folks in the United States at that time, uh, were displaced from their homes, family, land. And again, they weren't well seen or well treated for quite a while until they developed enough numbers and really started supporting each other by again creating these coalitions essentially. Um, and they did actually get disruption and pushback, from doing this. So it wasn't necessarily well received by everybody by demonstrating their group power this way. Yeah. So it was a pretty, I think explosive events, kind of in various ways. Not necessarily, I didn't read. I don't know if there was. I don't think there is. I don't think there's actually like violence or anything like that. I just think that like ideologically, because in the 11th house here is what is it? Libra. So a movable air sign. So there's a lot of ideas churning about what was this. It was probably just so unusual because again you've got Katie there with Mars. It's probably such a big sudden display, unusual display that people didn't really know what to make of it. And usually, when that confuses people, they don't always have positive thoughts, right? A lot of people don't like surprises, or maybe they thought they were being too aggressive with their demonstration of, group power. Could be. Then the 12th house here, 12th house lord is Mars, and it's aspected by Jupiter. So this could be, again, spiritual loss of a person in the past. Yeah. And then, so again, this is the oldest and largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the world. Sometimes up to 250,000 people participate, honoring St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland, who brought Christianity to the country. And again, this original parade here, back in the day, organized by Irish military expats who were happy to celebrate their culture openly. So, but there you go. So again, even within this chart, you see the same kind of idea of like, there is this loss of a patron saints, so there's a loss here, but there's also like beauty here as well. And this is something that's like, again, I keep looking up, famous charts, but all of these things are still like long lasting, 100 years, 200 years, some of these things. So, um, yeah, so, it's kind of like, how do you integrate or bridge or live with a dual reality, some kind of loss and some kind of beauty simultaneously. Okay, so what about your own chart? What's in your chart? So what you might do if you like to be your own astrologer is, take one of these planets or one of these houses or one of these combinations of things and find out, get a copy of your chart, your Vedic birth chart. You can get that free on the internet and a bunch of different places. And you can see here the graphic on the right. This is a North Indian style chart where your first house at the top, and then you go counterclockwise to get to the other house, second house, third house, fourth house, and so on. And so, like, you can find like, we've been talking about Pisces. So, like, which house is Pisces for you? And so maybe Pisces is in your, let's say, 11th house. Well, no, let's choose one that's on this page. 1, 7, 2, 8, 3, 9. Okay, let's say 9. Okay. Let's say Pisces is going on in your ninth house. So that would make you 1, 2, 3, 4. That would make you a Cancer rising chart. So all of this kind of shifting and changing would be going in your ninth house of government, authority, father, also spiritual community. So there might be a lot of, again, loss, but also beautiful, this duality of energy going on in your ninth house related to those things. Also, it could be like higher education. That's the ninth house as well. You can see I've written a few words here. But on this slide, what you can see, I've listed a couple houses that are on an axis. So I have like first bhava, seventh bhava, which are houses. So the first house represents self, personality, health, reputation, and the seventh house, I have a few words listed here. Now, these are just super, super basic, just a few words about each house, but I have videos on each of these houses if you want to get into detail. Okay. So the other thing is if you do like to be your own astrologer, just be gentle with yourself. Try not to scare yourself. If anything confuses you or, concerns you, you talk to a professional astrologer to help you sort it all out. But, as they say, a little knowledge can be dangerous. So it's just what you can do is just take notes. Like, again, if this Raja Yoga block of planets is going on your ninth house, you can just take notes, on your life. Like, what do you experience over the course of like the next month or two related to ninth house issues? Again, father, authority, teacher, religion, long distance travel, higher education, good fortune. And that way you can learn through your own life and what you experience in your own life how these planets move and what they mean and what they give and that sort of thing. Okay, potentially. And then on the next slide, we have the other houses. So the 410 axis, the 511 axis, the 612 axis. Again, just a few words. But again, if you want to just take notes, again, choose one planet, one house, or whatever, and just follow that over the course of the next month or two and see how that plays out for you. You can learn a lot of astrology that way. And it'll help ground you. Like, it helps you develop a better relationship with the planets and the houses and that sort of thing so that they actually, like, it sounds kind of funny, so that they actually talk to you. Because if you spend hours and hours every day with a person, you get to know them inside and out. You probably even stuff you don't want to know, right? So it's the same kind of thing. Like, if you spend the time, listening and watching and observing all these planets and houses and all this kind of stuff, you'll really get to know it in a deep, intimate way. Right? So, okay, so there you go. Thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. I appreciate all your support for my work and the channel. And all the different ways that you do that, liking and subscribing and posting lovely comments, sending in donations, all of it's very much appreciated. So thank you for that. Again, all my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are in my concepts playlist. They can be found there. For more famous birth charts, you can check out my birth chart archive list 2024 video, which I will be updating soon, but at least that's a pretty good list of most of the famous charts I've analyzed on the channel. I do offer individual birth chart readings. If you're interested, you can email heartlightash@yahoo.com. I do those live on Zoom as pre-recorded video, and I do offer gift certificates if that's interesting to you. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I talk about Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, and yoga, so other Vedic arts, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so it's out there too. So as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so take good care, and until the next one, namaste.